Chapter 3 No More Job. Kittering came down the valley at a slow pace. His mind was busy with the puzzling events that had just occurred, his interest strongly stirred by the curious force of the man and the beauty of that girl. Most of all, he was concerned over her wound. She certainly ought to have a doctor, he thought uncomfortably and guiltily, and wondered whether he should ride out to High Springs and bring one, in spite of his unpopularity. For 2 bits, he was beginning argumentatively when he was interrupted. For the second time that morning he heard the ugly whine of a bullet zinging past, and the report, sharp in that clear air, of a rifle. In one swift movement he moved and pulled up his horse. His 6-gun leapt into his hand. Directly ahead, on the open range but out of pistol shot, a compact group of horsemen were breaking up, beginning to stream out left to right so as to flank him. Rifles barked and leaden bees hummed in the air. Kittering's eyes darted about. There was only one way clear. Ahead lay the open range where the riflemen could pick him off easily. Running to the left or right meant racing the horns of a closing, flanking movement, with the same possibility of being sniped by a sharpshooter. On the instant, he wheeled his mount and dashed back into the valley. At full gallop he thundered along the creek trail, while behind him came the rumbling of pursuing hoofs and the bark of a carbine. "This is getting to be plumb unfunny," he grumbled, looking backwards over his shoulder. "Looks like everybody in the country thinks that I'm a plumb nuisance. Now who are these hombres now?" A sudden thought struck him. Whoever they were, they might not be friendly to the Short Hills homesteader, and it would not do to lead them back there. Or were they allies of that unfriendly person? In that case, he'd be caught between two fires. Either way, he had to break through the ring and head back towards the Lazy Bar X. His pursuers were pouring through the valley entrance as patched and splashed along the shallow creek and charged the hills that girded the valley. Amid a fresh burst of gunfire, the ponies scrambled over the hill and dashed into the protective cover of the trees. Kittering pulled the horse up, sprang from the saddle, ran back to the edge of the hill. At one side there was a sharp ledge of rock that ran along the hilltop. Gun in hand, Kittering threw himself flat onto the rock, peered over the edge. The horsemen were thundering down the trail, and as they came in pistol range, he raised his 6-gun and then uttered an involuntary exclamation of surprise. They were Lazy Bar X men, every one of them. He had been at the ranch only a week and was hardly close friends with any of them, but he knew them all well, and they knew him. He climbed his feet and slipped his gun back in the holster. At his appearance out on the open rock, every horse was dragged to a skidding stop, and rifles were half raised. Kittering held up his hand. "Wait a minute, boys," he said. "I don't know what's all this chasing about, but if you're all looking for somebody, you got the wrong man. What's going on here?" "It's Jim Kittering," a couple of men exclaimed. "What are you doing in Box Elder?" demanded the foremost rider. He was a soiled individual, no longer young, with a raspy voice and a small tobacco stain on his teeth. Kittering decided he didn't like the question, the tone in which it was asked, nor the man who asked it. "I don't need your permission to ride any place, Plug," he said. "I've been taking orders from Wilding." "And I suppose Wilding sent you down here instead of telling you to ride line over to Needle Butte?" "No, he didn't tell me to come down here, and I didn't." "Does Wilding know," Plug interrupted, "that you've been chatting with Slocum?" So the homesteader's name was Slocum. That was one piece of information. But Plug couldn't know that he had been talking to the homesteader he was guessing. "Plug," said Kittering coldly, "it appears to me like you're taking a heap of interest in other people's business. That's not the healthiest thing you could do." Plug grinned at him, baring his stained teeth again. "And what?" he said calmly but menacingly. "What are you figuring on doing about it?" I'm telling you to pull in your beak before it gets knocked off. I'm saying that I'll talk to Wilding about me being here, not you. Yeah, well, I'm saying you've been spying for Slocum, and you'll be pulling your freight in a minute if we wasn't loco enough to let you go. I'm saying that you're a liar. An instant tension came over the group. The horseman in the back of Plug faded away, leaving the air clear behind him. Kittering stood looking down at them, alert and watchful. You can eat those words and eat them fast, Plug, he said softly. He made no move, but stood there, his hands swinging loosely close to his sides. Plug scowled down at him, yet seemed to hesitate, and Kittering laughed lightly. Will you come up and use your fists like a man, Plug, or are you aiming to let your friends back there do your dirty work for you? A dull flush stained Plug's face. At the corner of his eye, Kittering could see one or two of the men shift uneasily in their saddles and lowering their eyes. I ain't fighting with no spy, said Plug. I'm taking you back to the ranch. Wilding, he can handle you. He's the boss. And when he gets through with you, you'll be wishing it'd been me. He motioned abruptly to the other men to close in, and Kittering watched them warily. He had no desire to be taken back to the ranch a prisoner, least of all by Plug. There was plenty he would like to say to Wilding himself, but he preferred to walk up to him and tell him straight out. His eyes traveled slowly around the tightening circle of mounted men. It'd be folly to resist. If he turned to dash up the slope, he'd be shot down instantly, and Plug would welcome the chance to take a shot at him. A half-dozen other guns were trained on him. It would be more than unpleasant to be escorted back to the ranch by that band of thugs, but apparently it couldn't be helped. He shrugged slightly. Once back at the ranch, he could tell his story to Wilding and then find Plug and beat the daylights out of him. The ranch is where I am aiming to go, he drawled, and then stiffened slightly. His eyes grew weary, but his voice dragged out, stalling for time. Out the corner of his eye, he had just noticed something, if he could just time it right. And after I've seen Wilding, I'll be attending to you. You're brave enough here with your friends all around you. We'll see how you are man to man. Not that I'm expecting any surprises now. His voice quickened. I know you're yellow. An oath burst from Plug's lips, and the man's face congested with fury, and his hand dropped swiftly towards his gun. His horse's tail switched up on his rump. But the shot never came. With a wild snort, Plug's horse reared, his eyes rolling, ears back, every muscle quivering. The bee that Kittering had noticed hovered above the horse's rump, and had alighted just as he threw his challenge at Plug. The horse had swished his tail to rid himself of the annoyance, and the bee retaliated. And as the horse reared, Plug, taken by surprise, was thrown from the saddle. The horse, still frantic, dashed off, headlong fright from the pain in his rump. The other horses, catching the panic, shifted uneasily on dancing feet, tossing their heads. Their riders, soothing them down, had their attention momentarily held by the stunned figure of Plug. It was time. Kittering turned and dashed back behind the ledge rock, and then, stooping, ran to where Patch was waiting, flung himself in the saddle, and then dug in his heels. The pony started forward. Behind him, Kittering could hear loud oaths and then the clattering of pursuing hoofs. But Plug and his band would have to circle around the steep stone face of the hill up which their horses could not clamber before they could pick up his trail. He was sure they thought he was running away and would not suspect at first that he was heading for the ranch and more trouble. That extra time would give him the start that he would need and keep him out of range, and would get him back to Wilding before them. The horse dashed down the slope, and Kittering bent low in the saddle to escape the overhanging branches. At the bottom of the ridge was a shallow depression that led to the flats, and Kittering took into the gulch. Presently he intersected the creek again, and as it flowed partially in the direction to which he was going, he rode in the water for a few hundred yards just to give his pursuers something to think about. and when his trail disappeared at the creek bed, they'd be sure to look for reappearing tracks in the opposite direction, not believing that he would be heading for the ranch. They would find them again, of course, but it would delay them for a while. He rode at a fast pace until the hills had dropped back and he was far out onto the rolling plain. There was as yet no sign of pursuit. He allowed Patch to drop to a slower gait. The horse, Kittering surmised grimly, would need all of his strength in the hours to come. In an hour, he was trotting down the well-beaten trail towards the ranch buildings, and he could see the windmill vanes turning slowly above the cottonwoods. He reached the corrals and rode up to the bunkhouse. The place looked deserted and still. There was no sign of life anywhere. Kittering held Patch in, scrutinizing the buildings and the grounds with new care. They were completely deserted. Air was strange. At length, he rode up to the bunkhouse. At least there was some sign of life there, and from the kitchen came an uproar which he incorrectly interpreted as the cook singing. Kittering stepped quietly into the bunkhouse. No one was there. He moved swiftly to his bunk, packed his belongings into a bundle. Well, I'm liable to be out of a job when the boys pull in, he grinned to himself. He tied the bundle to the back of his saddle, and then, turning towards the kitchen to which the sound was still issued, a voice which made up in power what it lacked in quality. The cook was in tone a ballad of a broken heart. I hung up my saddle, my rope, and my gun. The cow trails will see me no more. For a girl with blue eyes, my heart is undone. Hey! Kittering yelled. The cook's stubble-covered jaw stayed open. His bellowing ceased. Doggone ya! He exclaimed. Every time I'm fixin' to get Abigail belly tuned up real good, some fool cow nurse comes a-strayin' in here with his tongue hanging out. You can't get no chow till supper time, so you might as well mosey right back out of here. I don't want any chow. Where's the foreman? Kittering asked. Wilding? Well, I reckon he's up at the ranch house with the boss. What do you want him for? Oh, go on with your music lesson, Kittering said. He turned and went outside. The ranch was still deserted. He rode up to the big rambling structure set in a grove of cottonwood trees. A wide veranda ran clear around the house, almost touching the trees towards the back. Kittering led Patch up to one of the large trunks and left him there, close to the veranda of the house. He tramped up the steps and knocked on the door. In response, the door was opened by a tall, broad-shouldered man whose black hair was beginning to show the first frostings of gray. Howdy, Mr. Bates, Kittering said. Wilding with you? Why, yes, Bates said. He's here. Did you want to see him? Wilding's voice came from inside. Who's that? Somebody want to see me? He appeared in the doorway behind Bates, a shorter man and younger, with a keen, shrewd face. What is it, Kittering? As he recognized the rider. I'd like to talk to you, if I could see you alone for a few minutes. You can't tell me in front of Mr. Bates? Sure, Kittering drawled, stung by his tone. Sure, I can. I wasn't sure whether you'd like it, that's all. Oh, come on inside, Bates said, leading the way. The two men had apparently been working, for papers were scattered on the table, and Bates pushed them to one side. He motioned Kittering to a chair, and the puncher sat down on its edge, holding his sombrero uneasily. All right, what is it? Wilding said. I was riding past Needle Butte, just like you told me, he said, directing his words to Wilding, and I worked over towards Short Hills. My horse was pretty dry, and I headed that way, figuring I'd find some water. First thing I knew, someone was throwing some lead in my direction. Slocum, huh? Wilding exclaimed. No, sir, Kittering assured him. It was his daughter. Both men stared at him.
His daughter?
Yes, sir, his daughter. Only I didn't know it, and I plugged her. Bates rose swiftly to his feet, but Kittering saw a momentary flash in Wilding's eyes.
You shot Helen Slocum?
Bates gasped. Yes, sir, Kittering said miserably. But I didn't kill her, he added hastily. I just drilled her through the shoulder.
What happened?
Wilding demanded, his tone eager. Too eager, Kittering thought. I toted her home, and her old man threw me off the place. Said he told you that Short Hills was plumb unhealthy for any of your men. Seemed to be right smart annoyed at something.
Well,
Wilding exploded.
that fool Slocum is going to get himself into a heap of trouble.
Wait a minute, Kidding interrupted. That's not all. When I was coming out of the valley, I ran smack into a bunch of the boys.
Our boys?
Yeah, your boys. Plug, Lefty, McGuire, and all the rest of them. They saw me first, and when I woke up, they were filling the air with lead. They had rifles, and I only had the 6-gun, so I run into the woods and waited for 'em. And when they pulled in, I had a little talk with them. Your man Plug, he was downright insulting. Said I was spying for Slocum, and that if you knew about it, there sure would be trouble, and he ended up calling me a liar.
He called you a liar?
Wilding breathed.
And then what happened?
Well, Plug wouldn't fight being yellow, and the other boys had their guns on me, and they were going to bring me back forcibly, which I didn't care for nohow. So I came back myself. Bates looked at him incredulously.
And how did you manage that?
He asked. Kittering grinned. Well, it's just a matter of luck, he said. I reckon I'll let them tell you about it, but I want you to tell me what this is all about. I reckon I got a right to know what's going on and why they're pulling guns on me. Bates turned suddenly upon Wilding.
This fool business has got to stop, he said harshly. I told you enough times to keep your men away from there. You see, he explained to Kittering, I gave Slocum permission to stake out a homestead on that land. It was part of the Lazy Bar X. I knew Slocum a long time ago, and I wanted to do something for him. Wilding here is a cattleman, and he don't like homesteaders. I can see he's been making it uncomfortable for Slocum, and now you got to leave those people alone, Wilding.
Wilding said nothing, keeping his eyes upon Kittering's hat. There was a faint smile behind the corner of his mouth. But, Mr. Bates, Kittering said, it's not as simple as that. There must be more to it. There's entirely too much blamed excitement down there for just a little bad feeling. I'm not accusing nobody, but there's something you don't know about. There was a frozen silence, and then Wilding said stiffly,
Oh, you're talking through your hat, Kittering. I told my men to stay away from there, and as far as I know, they've been doing it. If I'd seen you come riding out of there, it would have looked mighty suspicious to me, too. They were following orders, and you wasn't. All right, Bates said. Let's not talk about it any more. It's not important enough. From now on, you just leave Slocum alone. I don't want any more going-ons over there. You savvy?
Kittering got to his feet, and Wilding rose at the same time and walked over to the window. From outside came the thunderous pounding of approaching horses, and he stood looking out, his hand on the shade. Without turning his head, he drawled, The boys are coming in now. I don't want any trouble, Kittering. The puncher shrugged. I sure don't, he said, but I can't tell you what's liable to happen. They're liable to be pretty riled. Oh, I'll go out there, Wilding promised, and I'll see about it. Kittering opened the door and stepped out onto the veranda. Patch was still standing by the cottonwood, but he was not grazing. His head was up, his ears pricked forward. He was looking past Kittering towards the corner of the house on Kittering's right. The puncher stiffened, his hand dropping towards his belt. Instant suspicion in his eyes, he took a swift sideways step towards the corner
his body tense, and then he smiled grimly. From his new position, he could see no one, but a shadow lay on the ground just beyond the corner, the shadow of a man trailing the open loop of a rope. Behind him, other shadows crowded. Kittering slid his hand into his pocket of his overalls and pulled out a jackknife. He opened the blade and concealed the knife in his palm of his hand and stepped boldly off the veranda towards his horse. Instantly there was a quick tramp of feet behind him, and he whirled about, and a rope fell over his shoulders and began to pull tight. In that fraction of a second, he saw the punchers come crowding around the corner behind McGuire, who had thrown the loop. Kittering's left hand shot up, and the knife flashed, and the severed rope fell at his feet, his sixth gun in his right hand pointing steadily on the group of men. "Now listen, boys," he began. "I don't want to hurt you, but you're making it doggone hard and uncomfortable not to." Out of the corner of his eyes he saw a movement, and flickered his glance in that direction of the house. Wilding stood in the doorway, leveling a sixth gun at him. Kittering whirled, ducked, and fired at the same moment. Wilding's gun banged, and he dropped it, staggered back, clutching his arm. Kittering felt the rush of the bullet past his face. In the same swift, whirling moment, he was astride his horse and spurring Patch past the corner of the house as the cowboys went for their guns. Revolvers barked. In one frenzied leap, the pony gained the shelter of the building, and Kittering spun him around into the grove of trees. Horse and rider disappeared among the trunks as the gang dashed wildly around the corner, their guns blazing. "Well," Kittering breathed as the pounding horse carried him along, "I reckon there's no more job there for me. 'Pears like I was right about Mr. Wilding. However, whatever he's got up his sleeve ain't no good for that girl. And from now on, Mr. Wilding is sure going to have more trouble than he figured on." End of chapter 3.